Let's see. There
and I can get that back to you.
That's perfect. All right, great. Thank you so much. First off, big thanks to Jim for hosting us, giving us the opportunity. It's my first time presenting here at Portland SUG. Thanks to Mamie, she came up with the idea, and we were like, yeah, we'll be happy to do it because this is something we're coming across everywhere. Every customer we talk to, and that's wanted to move to managed cloud. So I said, it'd be a great topic to discuss. And I think there was a great roundtable and a panel conducted on this. But we're here to present, Vasiliy and I, we're here to talk about, for going from Azure Search to SearchStax, right? Why would you do it? What is SearchStax? How would you get to it? What do you get if you are going with SearchStax? Does it compare to something like Coveo or what you have in-house or Solr on-prem? We'll try to cover as much as we can. And feel free to chime in. I'm happy to answer questions along the way. If not, we can answer questions towards the end as well. So we'll start with quick intros. That's my pre-COVID era picture where I still neat and shaven and trim. But I am the actually I need to update my profile a little bit recently. But I head the digital solutions group here at Altudo. Altudo is a platinum partner. I've been doing Sitecore for more than a decade, 2 decades, almost 2 decades of experience there working. Actually, the numbers need to change. But anyways, that's from my last symposium, I believe. But yeah, I've been doing a lot of Sitecore deliveries. I'm a technology MVP, work with, I don't know, more than 100 clients now in various capacity. Not everything is an end-to-end delivery. I don't do a whole lot of delivery, but I do engage with a lot of customers from the beginning to the end, focusing on value realization, especially when it comes to Sitecore and other things. So I'm based in Atlanta. That's a little late here, but happy and energized to be here. You can follow me on Twitter at Sitecore Varun. I have my blog post on sitecorevarun.com. And I'll hand it over to Vasiliy for his intro.
Thanks, Varun. Hi, everyone. Jim, also joining Varun. Thank you for having us. SearchStax is actually one of my favorite things to talk about lately. So I was excited to hear about this opportunity. So I work with Varun closely at Altudo as a Senior Director of Solution Architecture, leading everything that touches Sitecore. I've been a Sitecore MVP for the past 7 years. I worked with the platform for over a decade, everything from small mom pop shops to global implementations. So long story short, I live and breathe Sitecore. Let's put it that way. Outside of that, I'm really a MarTech enthusiast. I've been spending quite a bit of time in Azure, playing around with AI, various interesting things. Blockchain is also an interesting one. I've dipped into Ethereum, and content and CDPs have been taking up my time lately. If you guys have any questions for me about really any topic around Sitecore, I'm happy to help. But like I said, Sitecore is my passion, so feel free to email me at Vasiliy.Fomichev@Altudo. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, ping me on Twitter, and make sure to check out altudo.co and my blog, cmsbestpractices.com.
All right, just one slider. Just want to throw it out there. Got to do one of those, represent Altudo. But yeah, we're a platinum partner. We got a few MVPs. We specialize in a number of partnerships that are adjacencies to Sitecore, done a ton of projects, yada, yada, yada. But I want to start with the highest level, right? I don't want to make any assumptions about how much people are using Azure Search, how they compare it with Solr. Do they know why or why not to go with it? Maybe you're on-prem, you want to go into the cloud, and now somebody's saying, oh, Azure Search. And then somebody says, well, Azure Search is over, now it's something else. So I'm going to start at the highest level, try to make the case, and then talk about the what, the why, and how. And then I'll hand it over to Vasiliy. So at the highest level, right, if you start with just your hosting options, right, where are you hosted today? Why would you even encounter this topic of Azure Search versus Solr, Managed Solr, or SearchStax as an offering? If you're in one of these 3 categories, right, that you're an Azure customer, right, you're either managing it yourself or you have a subscription, you've given it to a partner, they manage it on your behalf. Or, you're working with Sitecore and Sitecore manages it on your behalf. And then there's also maybe a partner helping you along the way. So you're very covered in terms of your hosting options. In any of these cases, you're on Azure, right? And you're confronted with the option of, Azure Search versus Solr. You're used to Solr, and now there's Azure Search, right? That is an option. But then the next consideration is, if you're classic IaaS deployment, maybe the topic doesn't apply to you as much because you don't care. You've deployed Solr on another VM and you're happy, and you've figured out any topology, master, slave, zookeeper, whatever you want to do. You have full flexibility. In that case, you're not too worried, right? But if you're one of those customers who are looking to be more advanced, you want to be, PaaS or even more newer, you're AKS because you're version 10 and it's all about containers. Certainly you're thinking about what are my alternatives, especially when you're on PaaS. You're thinking about what are my alternatives, because I really can't host Solr effectively, but I like Solr, or maybe I don't like Solr, but I have Azure Search and I'm struggling with Azure Search. And I'll talk about some of those reasons, right? So if we just compare Azure Search to Solr, right? Some of these courtesy of, Sitecore and SearchStax, basically the idea is the limits, right? That's the number one issue with Azure Search. There's a limit on the number of fields and what Azure can really do. Performance is not that great either. Availability across regions, if you're scaled across the world, because that's why you're going to the cloud, because you don't want to be limited by your data centers and where you can reach your customers. Again, Azure Search is not one of those things that's just, available everywhere in the scale that you want it to operate. So the cost is obviously a factor. We all know Solr is easy for, free, and you don't pay for it. But Azure Search, now you're paying a good chunk of change for a feature that Sitecore has always promoted as, hey, you get free search with Sitecore, right? It's not free anymore if you have to host Azure Search, Azure Search and then pay a premium for it. But finally, as of version 10, Sitecore had announced that they're deprecating Azure Search completely, and in the following release it'll be eliminated, which is basically 10.1. So technically, Azure Search is gone, right? It's deprecated. So what are your alternatives? So that's why we're here to kind of talk about SearchStax. So what is SearchStax? What does it offer? It's got two products. Again, Vasiliy will probably dive into this a whole lot more. The one on the left is what I'm talking about, right? So Managed Solr, basically Solr as a service, compensating for your infrastructure needs. The alternative, the other side of their product is something comparable to, let's say, Coveo. And, with Coveo, you want more marketing managed search versus developer managed search solution. That's your site search in SearchStax, but I would tell you it's probably a whole lot cheaper and it works really well. But Mamie's here. Feel free to reach out to her. She'll schedule a demo. She does an incredible demo herself. So if you're interested in site search or any other demos, you can reach out to her. But you get a bunch of good stuff in there, right? And the best part is it supports Azure, AWS, and Google. So you're not limited with just being on Azure. If you are still interested and need Solr as a service, you're covered, right? Your top 3 providers are all covering it. The site searches, again, it's got a lot of features, but I'll let Vasiliy kind of dive into that. So what is SearchStax for Sitecore? Because SearchStax offers its services for, let's say, Drupal as well, right? So when it comes to Sitecore, high availability, the global clusters, right? Incredible SLAs, support for multiple clouds, having the APIs and webhooks to kind of make it very developer friendly, and being secure and compliant from the get-go. All of these are basically things that you just can't ignore, right? It provides all of these things when you offer that first flavor of that product. So let's talk about why SearchStax, right? Because maybe you want to do something different. Is there a case to actually go with SearchStax? So if you are a company or organization or a team that doesn't specialize in solar, solar may not be the easiest one to maintain or to install and have high availability. The high availability part is really the complicated part. If you're a developer, yeah, sure, you can install solar, run it all day long, non-prod, you're completely fine. But when you have to go to production, you want a highly resilient topology. It could take you a minute to configure that and maintain it and keep it up and running. And it's not just for web search, right? Because we all know you can't run Sitecore without Solr. So it becomes even more important that high availability Solr is not an option, right? And then, you know, it could be one of those things where you're focused on your mission and your objectives as your IT team or Sitecore team. And then now you, in addition to having to learn, let's say, how do I manage Azure? You're also learning to manage Solr, right? So it's one of those distractions that says, well, let me just focus on what my team, my marketing team wants, what their objectives are. But now you're having to deal with, you know, all these other things that could be a bit of a distraction. So what do you actually get with the SearchStax for Sitecore? It does basically all of what you need it to do. And I'll walk us through a few screenshots of what the interfaces look like. I don't have a flashy demo here, but we'll at least talk about, we'll at least see the steps and see, can it really be that simple? It's really that simple. So it does everything from checks your connectivity. Is Sitecore up? Is Solr up? Are you, applying the right cluster to the right Sitecore instance, the right deployment cluster of Solr? It deploys your config files. There's an app in Sitecore that ensures all of this works fine. It determines if Solr is running on a single non-production node or if it's a multi-node high availability cluster. So it can do a lot that would, take us or an IT team quite a bit to kind of keep up with. XDB collections, there's aliases for that. If you have multiple, instances and environments that you want to make sure you're pairing up with the right instance of Solr. High redundancy availability, we already covered. But also, the part that, do I have the right config files? Who's going to deploy them? Do they come from DevOps, this, that, and the other? You don't have to worry about it, right? The app takes care of all of it. And lastly, if you go to Sitecore's documentation today, where you go and look for managed cloud architecture, that is the standard, the thing in the red box. Sitecore officially mentions SearchStax as the go-to for Solr as a service when it comes to managed cloud. So all our customers on managed cloud are being recommended SearchStax as the default option. So to me, it's finally a ride, right? If Sitecore is kind of made it its standard, having gone through years of a managed cloud offering for customers, SearchStax has arrived as a product. The biggest part is also the compliance, right? There's a ton of things that, imagine if you were to try to do this with your own Solr instance and get GDPR compliance and, getting into the cloud and making sure you have enough security. It's a lot of work. Right. It's an afterthought. A lot of people probably don't even look back and say, well, is my Solr instance SOC 2 compliant? Right. Have you gone through the security check and are you keeping up with the compliance needs as they evolve in your organization? Well, you don't have to worry about it. Right. Let's just offload that to somebody who's a specialist at that, and they're giving you all of this. So encryption in transit, at rest, IP filtering, audit logs, you get the whole 9 yards. So I think that really kind of makes the case for SearchStax in a number of different ways, core capability wise, product definition wise, feature set wise, even Sitecore kind of promoting it. So hopefully that kind of just sums it up to say, yeah, well, I need SearchStax. How does it work? So this is where I'm going to show a few screenshots and say, well, the interface is pretty cool. It kind of reminds me a little bit of Azure portal as well. But if you see the button on the right and where I took the screenshot, you'll see the pointer is on the version. But what I'm trying to highlight is on the right-hand side, you have the big button that says create new deployment. That's really where you would start to create a new Solr deployment. These are examples of 2 that have been created for 2 different versions of Sitecore. But then when you click on that create new deployment button, you get a simple interface where you give it a name, pick a cloud provider, pick a region, and generally you're going with something like a dedicated cluster. And it tells you exactly what it's going to cost you, what is the size, no hidden, variables of what it's going to, show up in your monthly bill or something to that effect. But it's a very simple interface. Once you're done with this, that's basically it. It takes some time, and there's some other things that you can go and read on SearchStax documentation where you can see how you manage it, how you monitor it, what kind of insights you can collect about the telemetry of the deployment. But let's say the simplest level, you just created a deployment and now you're just trying to connect it to Sitecore. You just fill out those details. It spun up an instance. You go into Sitecore. When you have the module installed, you get an app for it. Like I mentioned, click on SearchStax. It gives you a simple login interface. And because SearchStax is fully SaaS, you log into the platform. And once you're in the platform, you basically pick which instance, which deployment you want to pair up with this instance. So all your deployments will show up here. You pick one, and then you give it a prefix and you hit connect. And that's it. Boom. That's it. All your files get deployed. Everything magically happens behind the scenes, and you have an up and running Solr instance just like that. Right. I've never deployed Solr that easily. But yeah, to me, it's a no brainer. So pretty easy, pretty straightforward. I still want to get my hands on it and try it out for myself. But I think it really takes the cake when it comes to making Solr really as a service and that easy to consume. So let me hand it over to Vasiliy at this point. Vasiliy, if you want to take on the presentation, I'll stop sharing.
All right, thanks, Varun. So before we jump into the theory part, let me continue on the topic of simplicity. So like I said, I find myself more and more in conversations around SearchStax. And basic questions I get is it worth it? What's the difference? Can we do it ourselves? Yes, you can. How long is it going to take? And how much is it going to cost you? That's a different question. How easy is it to set up? Well, so here I want to just put this aside and settle this once and for all, and show you how really easy it is to set up a Solr cluster. So let's go ahead and create a deployment. What I did here actually is I registered for a free trial. You get a 14-day free trial on SearchStax.com. I encourage everyone to go ahead and register. No credit card information needed. Just go ahead and plug in your information, your email. You'll get an account, and you'll be good to play around with it and get more familiar with the service. So here we go. So if I want to, let's say, create a new deployment, let's go to demo. I get an option of hosting providers, AWS, Azure, and Google, what were mentioned. So here you see a slight cost difference. That's one thing I want to point out. Once you go from one hosting provider to another, for instance, 4 GB system here on Amazon is $160. The same system on Azure is slightly higher, and Google is just a bit higher than that. Actually, when I first saw the support for Google Cloud, I was actually pretty surprised. Google Cloud is not generally an enterprise-friendly cloud. There are plenty of articles written on that. Is simply that's due to the fact that they deprecate their technology every 2 to 3 years. So if you're an enterprise, it takes you just that long to get through a sizable project. By the time you're done, you're already deprecated. And when Google deprecates their stuff, they really mean it. They shut it down. There is no legacy support. There are plenty of people upset about it. Anyways, I digress. That's a different story. So back to the setup. Stop the recording. Oh, there we go. We're back on.
Sorry, I think I fat fingered something there. So go ahead.
All right, so we'll give it a name. We'll pick the cloud. Let's say we pick the 2 node instance. We pick the region. Let's say West US, California. Pick the Sitecore version. I'll stick with the latest recommended one. I'm not going to do anything with private VPC. I don't think we get that option in the free trial. And that's it. Oh, let's see. Plan. And that's it. Off we go. In 15 to 17 minutes, I think that's how long it took me to create the cluster the first time around. You'll have a Sitecore Cloud cluster running. So that is how easy it is to set up the cluster. And the only thing that I can think of that's faster than that, if you have a scripted container deployment, but then you would have probably spent a significant amount of time to get that working to begin with. So let's dig into Managed Cloud. And let me go ahead and share my presentation. We'll dig a little more into each product, Managed Cloud and Site Search. I'll give you guys some deeper insight into what's happening, what options we have in terms of configurations, what kind of features are available with each product.
Managed Solr, right?
Managed Solr, yeah. Managed Solr. All right, can you see the slides now?
Yep.
Excellent. All right, so when it comes to Managed Cloud, we're going to touch on these 8 items. Multi-cloud we sort of already talked about. We'll touch a bit on the various architectures that we have available in Managed Solr. We'll talk about the scalability options. We'll touch on the private environments, why we care about them, why they're important. We'll talk about the disaster recovery options. We'll dive into the management APIs, what those are and why we care. We'll take a look at a couple of integrations for monitoring that come with Managed Cloud out of the box, and we'll talk about webhooks. In fact, I configured one, pretty straightforward, really easy to do. Again, just as easy as creating a deployment. Just like Varun mentioned, we have 3 options for cloud hosting: Azure, AWS, and Google Cloud. So if you're on Sitecore, you're probably looking at Azure and AWS. In fact, moving forward, unless you're in IaaS, you're probably going to be on containers. Oh, how did that skip? You're probably going to be on containers. That means you're going to be on Azure Cloud, most likely, especially if you're on looking to use Kubernetes. There are Kubernetes deployments on AWS. You just got to watch out that Sitecore doesn't support EKS. So Azure is likely going to be your choice of hosting. Now, what you also want to do is host your Solr region or Solr deployment in the same region as your AKS cluster. In fact, if you really want to eliminate any kind of latency, you can go the peering route, which we'll touch on with the private networks. So when it comes to architectures, you have an option of 3 basic setups. So the single node one, that's the one I just showed you guys with the creation of the new deployment. That's a basic setup with the Zookeeper. It's a single node setup, Zookeeper and a single search node. The second option is for a production hosting, single region. So this is a high availability setup. This is what you see here in the bottom right corner. We have a 3-set Zookeeper and 2 sets of Solr nodes with a load balancer. This fits well for a single region production deployment. Now, if we're looking at multiple regions, we're serving users globally, then we want to look at the multi-regional setup, and that's what you see on the left side here. So each region would have its own Solr cluster. Now we have some options for scalability. Now, this is horizontal scalability. We can have multiple things that trigger scalability. In fact, we have 3 options. So we can schedule our cluster to be scaled out at a certain time on a certain date. That comes helpful when we prepare for special events. So you can read a little more about that in my white paper from the presentation on preparing Sitecore Commerce for special events. This is something obviously you want to test in advance, but this is helpful where you can eliminate some of the human error and pre-schedule the scaling in preparation for a flash spike in traffic, for instance. Now, if the traffic increase is more gradual, you can go the regular scaling route. You can use resource utilization, or you can use, let's say, a number of requests that are coming in to start scaling out horizontally. Again, just like with any other type of scaling, be careful because it's not instantaneous. It takes time to scale those things out. It's not a burst type scaling what you have with, for instance, AKS. And then finally, if something dropped unexpectedly and we need to scale out now, there's always a request that we can submit to the SearchStax team, and the engineers will scale that out for us. Okay. Now, private environments is an interesting subject. So this is something that we can set up for a couple of reasons, and this is why we care about this. One is security. Obviously, we can secure our traffic, create a tunnel, create a VPN peering with, let's say, our on-site application and, let's say, a remote Sitecore cluster. Two is performance. So like I mentioned previously, if we want to reduce the latency between, let's say, your Sitecore application and the Solr cluster, obviously we want to be on the same cloud to begin with. We want to be in the same region, but if we're really serious about it, we can't sacrifice a millisecond. Then the VNet approach, which is what is used for peering on Azure, VNet peering can allow us to eliminate that latency altogether, because if once we put the VMs or let's say Sitecore instances running on one virtual network and pair it with another virtual network running Solr, latency is going to be the same as if those two were on the same virtual network, right? So that's important to remember. Same is achieved with virtual private clouds. Private environments are available across all three hosting providers, which is important to know. Now, when it comes to disaster recovery, we have a pretty classic standard selection of offerings: hot, warm, and cold. A hot disaster recovery site is a replica of our production environment. It synchronizes with our production cluster, and whenever there's an interruption in our service on the production side, the switch flips over to the hot DR. Obviously, the replica site is in a different region on the same hosting provider. That's just so it doesn't get knocked out by the same, let's say, disaster that knocked out the production site, for instance. Now, a warm DR site is a more cost-effective option to the hot one. So it's still an always on, always there cluster of Solr, but it's on a single node. That's the deployment that I just created. So the benefit of that is obviously the cost. You're not spending as much for running a fully scaled cluster in parallel, but of course you have limited throughput and redundancy in that case, right? So if you're experiencing a heavy traffic load, and if that was what brought your Solr cluster down, then it's definitely going to kill your warm site when it flips over. Cold one is pretty standard. So with the cold disaster recovery site, we don't have another cluster up and running. In fact, what happens is a backup of your production cluster is created. It's stored in another region. So the backup is stored in another region. And let's say your production goes out of commission, then SearchStax engineers would start setting up a new search cluster using the backup. So everything is going to start from scratch. Each one of these has its own SLAs and recovery point time. So I encourage you guys to check those out in the Sitecore documentation. Management APIs is an interesting feature of SearchStax, and I was actually pleasantly surprised to see how robust and comprehensive those were. In a nutshell, SearchStax opened up the management of Solr deployments through their APIs. So basically, pretty much everything or most of the things that we can do through the dashboard, we can do through the API. So what that can let us do is hook up Solr cluster management into, let's say, our on-premise tools that we use for managing all of our systems, for instance, right? And avoid having to log into another portal. SearchStax did a pretty good job of documenting all those APIs. So check out their documentation on all these endpoints. It's pretty much a standard CRUD operations around all of these categories that you see on the left side here. Out of the box, we get two integrations for monitoring, one with New Relic and another one with PagerDuty. So New Relic is a common application monitoring tool that most of us are probably familiar with. Two types of monitoring that are supported. There's the APM, which is our application analytics, and the servers, New Relic servers, which measures the resource usage of the application, which in case it would be the VM resource usage. And the page duty alerts, pretty straightforward. If you've ever worked with it, it simply allows us to create notification alerts. So it extends the alert functionality that's in SearchStax out of the box. And out of the box, we actually can get pretty robust, even without pager duty. So we can set up custom alerts through the Pulse area in SearchStax dashboard. Let's say we can create a notification when, as you can see on the screenshot here, your CPU usage reaches a certain level. We can shoot an email. What we can also do is we can trigger a webhook and supply some variables to go in the payload. In fact, I played around with a webhook, and it's really easy to set up and test. I spun up in 5 minutes a quick logic app and to accept GET request, and plugged in the webhook into it, and was actually going to do a quick post. In fact, let me see if I can do that right now. So what I'll do is I have a webhook here. I'm not going to share my screen, but if you're watching your social networks, you can probably see a new post coming in pretty soon. There we go. So I just triggered a webhook. What that's going to do is it called a logic app, and then it's going to post a message on my LinkedIn profile. All right, now let's get into Site Search. So Site Search is a relatively new product at SearchStax. Managed Cloud is really what SearchStax is famous for. Not many know about Site Search, and Site Search is just like what Varun mentioned previously, similar to the accelerator that Coveo provides. Right? So there are a few things that come with that. There is the UX accelerator, which is your search interface, the experience that you can use to build out, save you time on building out the search functionality on your Sitecore implementation. It comes with a set of configuration that you can perform just with point and click through a separate dashboard that's separate from the Managed Cloud. It does support Sitecore personalization and testing through what's called relevance modeling. It also has support for the SXA Toolbox, which was a pleasant surprise, and it does have some pretty straightforward analytics. You know, I would say not as perhaps robust, but it's simple and it's effective. And it's almost like going to let's say a restaurant with a few options, and it's easy and simple to you get exactly what you want. I'm thinking of In-N-Out right now. That's perhaps maybe because I'm hungry, but that's the analogy that I'm thinking of right now. It's effective and it's good, and it's the same as the interface in SearchStax. You don't get bombarded by the analytics and vanity metrics. You get a handful of metrics that are effective and actionable. So here's the UX accelerator. So by default, we get a set of components with search bar, auto suggestion, spell check, with some UI customization around color coding of the different types of content that you can search, faceting, spell check, sorting, pagination. So pretty standard search experience. Out of the box, Site Search allows us to configure that search experience. So which is important to remember. Working with Sitecore, we may be used to doing some of those configurations out of Sitecore, for instance, or using our component settings. So the way Site Search works is it relies on the configuration in the Site Search portal. So here we can customize what fields are shown in the search result page, what facets are available, the stop words, synonyms, spell check. In fact, those are pleasant surprises, because normally, again, if you were to run Solr yourself, you'd have to do some of those things through configuration, right? Resetting your Solr instances, for instance. Here, it's all done with point and click, no development or deployment required. Search ranking and relevance with relevance models. So this is an important concept that I encourage everyone to read into. Relevance models allow us to customize the way search functions. So it allows us to specify which fields can be used in search, give each field custom ranking for relevance ranking or relevance boost. For instance, making some fields more important than others when it comes to search. For instance, when a keyword is found in the title, we may give that more importance than if it were to be found, let's say, in the body of the page, for instance. We get some basic rules functionality. So it's the basic if-then, for instance, rules around search queries. And what we can also do, and this is, I think, is pretty powerful, promotions, which allows us to custom order and, well, first of all, promote, which is where the promotions title comes from, promote search results for certain search queries to the top and custom order search results. Right? So for instance, if a user on the website searches for a given keyword or a phrase, we can select which results would show at the top and in a specific order. Okay. Now, relevance models also help us with Sitecore personalization and A/B testing. What we can do is we can create multiple relevance models. In fact, when you set up site search for the first time, you get a default relevance model right out of the gate. So when it comes to personalization, if we want to test different models, play around with different relevance metrics, for instance, or different ordering, search result ordering for certain search queries, we want to create multiple relevance models and plug those into Sitecore personalization. So the Sitecore module for site search adds a new condition that allows us to pick the relevance model to be used in search when certain Sitecore rules get satisfied, right? So we still get to use our powerful Sitecore personalization rules engine to create the conditions that need to be matched. And then as an action here, you can see on the left side on the screenshot, we would choose which search model we want SearchStax to use when these conditions are true. So this allows us to get pretty actually sophisticated. So, and support some interesting search scenarios. Let's say around user profiling. If a profile matches certain user profile or accumulates certain number of engagement points or matches against a particular persona, for instance, like a camper. If we had a camping product website or just an outdoors website, perhaps once that match happened, we can now switch out a model to a camper search relevance model and then show camping related products closer to the top, for instance, and or prioritize products that are in a camping category for that user moving forward. So that is a interesting and pretty powerful feature of site search. So, and like I said previously, Sitecore Toolbox is supported out of the box. So we get the familiar SXA Toolbox experience, the drag and drop. Now I would encourage to update the icon and maybe perhaps the name of the rendering, you know, is a good practice, but it plugs right in. The module has the rendering. Once it's installed, you get that out of the box. All you need to do then is add it to the available renderings in the SXA, and off you go. It'll be available in the toolbox. And finally, we get the analytics. That's what I was talking about before. Now, this is not groundbreaking, but as you can see, this is pretty insightful. Most popular searches, no search results found. Search is definitely more than you get in Sitecore out of the box. Most click content. My favorite one is Power Search that provides query-based reporting. So you can search through all of the search queries, let's say within a given period of time, and pull out various types of reports based on the type of the query, whether it was clicked or not, so various attributes. So that is a really powerful feature. And with that, that brings us to the end of the presentation. So we have two powerful tools in the SearchStax arsenal. So the Managed Cloud, which allows us to sleep through our weekends and not worry about having to manage our Solr instances, and Site Search that dramatically cuts the time to market with new search experiences and provides a lot of flexibility and really makes your developer and sysadmin life easier.
Cool. You're a ghost, by the way, Vasiliy.
Aha.
I see a ghost. But great work. I just want to sum it up with we do have shout out to Samir, who's the CEO of SearchStax. He's on here if you have any questions. I think we have Danielle and Mamie as well. Danielle from the Partner Alliances. So if you're a partner, this is one partnership you have to have, because going forward, SearchStax is going to be part of Managed Cloud. So any customer who is on, you have a client who's on Managed Cloud will eventually need SearchStax. And if you are a customer and you're struggling with Azure Search, please ask away. You have the team here. Any questions? No questions.
You know, one thing I would say is we get, as partners, we get lots of questions around, is it really worth it? Can we do it ourselves? Can we do everything that SearchStax has? Yes, you can. The question is, how much is it going to cost you? Now, to spin up a cluster, brand new cluster, it's an involved process, right? And you just saw me spin out a cluster right out of the gate in 15 minutes. It was already done. Now, there are plenty of other things that people tend not to think about when it comes to Solr. So perhaps it's the ease of the Solr initial install that made people sort of, or sysadmins, be slightly more ignorant towards everything else that comes with owning Solr. Or perhaps their lack of knowledge of the platform, because Solr is a different stack, right? It runs on Java to begin with. It's not a Microsoft stack. It requires a different set of skills. But there is a lot that comes with running Solr, a lot of responsibility. When you start thinking about it, how do you do your security? Do you have backups? How's your disaster recovery doing? How's your compliance doing? You know, all those things need to be accounted for, and frequently, although some of those things could be set up in the beginning, maintaining those things continuously is what's going to be expensive. And that the real cost of Solr is not the upfront cost. It's not the CapEx, it's the operational expense. It's the things that you're gonna pay for later down the road, and that they will continue creating drag financially and resource-wise. So that is perhaps the biggest argument for going for SearchStax, in my opinion.
In fact, to kind of take it one step further, going back to Dylan's composable DXP, it is a very integral part of a composable DXP architecture is search. What do you plug in for search? So if you're going with Sitecore as a cornerstone and you're starting to build a DXP, it's a no-brainer that SearchStax as a SaaS offering plugs in that thing, which takes me to the next point. What's the next Sitecore acquisition? Who knows, right? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Samir, anything you want to add?
Hey, Varun. No, I think, our team's really focused.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, I think the team's really focused around kind of, really want to make sure we can bring kind of powerful search. And I think I've spent, I don't know, my entire career in search starting 2001, right? Starting from Lucene 1.2 and being a developer myself, I've kind of gone through, running search infrastructure and teams for different companies. And I've firsthand kind of seen the complexity that it takes to kind of do something like that. I think, the mission of the team is really kind of how can we make search easy for everyone, right? And that's really kind of what the mission of the team is, and kind of driving towards that.
I have to say, you guys nailed it.
There's a question in the chat from Chris. We have a multi-region Sitecore installed in Azure, but we only have Solr installed in one region. We weren't sure how easy it would be to have a multi-region Solr deployed. Does SearchStax have an option to do multi-region Solr with Zookeeper or something in Solr dealing with keeping the data in sync?
Yes, the answer is yes. And that is one of the architectures that we saw on the previous slides. That's the multi-regional architecture. So basically you're running an HA, a high availability Solr cluster in each region that's synchronized.
Samir, anything you want to add?
Yeah, just to add to Varun, absolutely correct. If you're on the latest versions of Solr, especially 7.2 and above, SearchStax supports CDCR. It's cross data center replication, which essentially brings your RPO requirements or needs down to even like a minute or 2 minutes, right? So prior to 7.2, how SearchStax enabled synchronization across different geographical data centers was we actually built a proprietary technology internally to make sure that two data centers were in sync. With 7.2, we are giving our customers option to have a DR sync utilizing CDCR that brings down the the time lag between one geographical region and another geographical region to be sometimes less than 1 minute. And technically it's instantaneous, but I'd like to not commit instantaneous, because depending upon the resources that your Solr cluster is using, sometimes the data can lag, and it could take a couple of minutes or a few minutes to kind of reach the other geographical region and sync up appropriately.
There you go.
Pretty impressive.
Yep. All right. Any other questions? If not, I can stop recording. I'll hand it back to you, Jim. Want to wrap up? Any other questions, anyone? All right. I'm gonna stop recording now.